everybody to the Realty Remarks podcast with the Dwyer team. I am getting things going as everybody is turning off their phones because
Are we live, Hannah? Are we live here? I didn't realize
that. But someone on the team kept their phone on last time.
Yeah, Hannah.
I think it was you.
I don't know what you're talking about. But anyways, they're off, they're good, and we're ready to go with some great topics. We're really excited about what we're about to talk about. And I think Jerry is a great guy to wrap up what we're going to get into.
All right. Instead of wrapping up, why don't we start it first?
Let's begin.
So it's funny that I wanted to bring this up because all of us have experienced this, and it seems to be coming up more and more. So the topic that seems to come up is rental items that are a benefit or a hindrance when you're selling. And a lot of people think or want to, especially now with everything being so expensive, but people want to rent their furnace and AC along with their water heater, which isn't necessarily a benefit from the big picture of a sale. Buyers don't expect the furnace and AC to be rented. So it can be a bit of a challenge because of financing. That's considered a lien on the property that can affect their purchase power. Mm-hmm. So it's common when we see water heater rentals, and I think we've all experienced that. Anybody would know about a rental water heater, and there's a few companies that do it, but they're also we're seeing more and more rental items on furnace and AC. So I just wanted to bring that up as a topic because I know that seems to be coming up more and more when we go on appointments with buyers and sellers. What's normal? Mm-hmm. What can they expect to inherit when they buy a property?
And as things get more expensive, the financing options seem to be out there a lot more. Things are being rented a lot more, and we want to talk about what should be rented, what is a benefit to be rented, what is normal to be seen as a rented item in real estate, and what you should be looking for when you're purchasing. And a lot of people don't even realize they might have owned every time they moved. They don't even realize there is an option to rent, and that whole
that's true.
right.
That's true.
So there's a lot to talk about here.
It can because it's the norm. A lot of times it gets forgotten until you get to offer or until you get to closing, and then it comes up and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, the water heater's rented or the water heater's owned." And is that a benefit? I mean, I own my water heater, and it was a rental when I bought my house. And after a few months, I inquired about purchasing the water heater that was there. That was a rental, and I did that. And it only lasted a little bit, but then I replaced it with a brand new one, and I own it. So is that a benefit? I think it is. I don't have that monthly rental, but it's not excessive. I at least from what I remember from a rental water heater, they can be excessive, especially if you're talking about a rental tankless water heater. So that on-demand water heater, that can be expensive, and I know you can rent those.
Well, historically too, a water heater tends to be more of the norm of what we see to be rented. So I think we should talk about that a little bit later and kind of get into what's not as normal, which is the furnace and AC.
Okay, so furnace and AC rentals are becoming more common. Mm-hmm. I won't say they're popular, more common than what they used to be, but
so why do you think we're seeing that? I feel like it's a cost challenge for sure.
I think in times past there's been few companies that actually finance rental and AC. So what happens is somebody's sitting at home on a cold winter night and their furnace goes out and they need it replaced quick, and they don't happen to have $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000, and their credit card maybe doesn't have that kind of a threshold to carry that, so they get locked into these payment plans that go on forever and ever and ever and ever, and they don't realize. And the nightmare story I have is a couple in St. Thomas wanted to sell their house, and they had owned and paid on their furnace, AC, and tankless water heater for about 7 years, and the buyout was over $20,000. And I thought, well, they made a mistake. That can't be right. And I called the company with the seller's permission, and they said, oh yeah. And not only that, it was not open-ended. If they wanted to pay it out, they were paying every dime of the
the interest and everything.
Yes, everything.
That's what I
And but since then, I've come across that multiple times. And we've actually had buyers extremely interested in the house, and they'll walk away because they don't want that added cost. They don't see the value in it, and I tend to agree.
Well, the other struggle is the last time I saw it, it was on a fairly affordable condo, and the buyer that we were working with, it affected their purchase power, and they couldn't close on the property. They couldn't buy it because of the $280 a month or whatever the amount was excessive for the furnace and AC, which blew their margins. So they couldn't afford this property based on the furnace and AC, and the seller could do nothing about it because they couldn't buy it out.
Mm-hmm. And at what point are you paying over and over again for the same?
Well, you're right. I mean, discussing with furnace companies, I mean, it's always, in my opinion, anyways, it's always best to whatever you do to buy it and finance it versus rent it, just so you don't have that stigma on your listing of a rented furnace and AC, which could affect value or could affect your buyer because of them having to inherit a monthly bill, another monthly bill.
Now, what would you say to someone who would argue, though, that having a rented furnace and AC is just easier? Someone can come repair it if something happens. They can come maintenance it. They don't have to worry about it. In their mind, that's just one less thing to worry about. And that seems to be the appeal of renting.
And I think that's how, I mean, when you talk to people that have, at least in our experience, when we talk to the people that have signed up for the rental, that's what they're holding on to is, okay, so I pay the 200 and whatever, or 150 or whatever it is a month, and I don't have to worry about repairs. But when you factor in the amount of money you're spending monthly, would that exceed the repair on installing a brand new furnace anyways? Because a brand new furnace is, in any experience that we have with it, is going to last you quite a few years before it causes a problem for the most part. So the money that you're spending right away, monthly, and then they'll say that they'll come out annually or semi-annually and do a service on it to get the furnace checked and get the AC checked, and that's included in your monthlies. But is that the right way to spend your money?
And
really?
It's getting a little bit off track here, but another thing that I've seen immensely more common in condos, those with baseboard electric heat, but also those with hot water boiler heat, is getting those ductless ACs put in. And mainly, I'm seeing those have been rented.
Oh, yeah.
And when I inquired about it, it was quite expensive. I was pretty blown away.
The cost to purchase or the cost to rent?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they make the cost to purchase and then rent to own was what I was looking into. But I'm seeing that a lot more, and I was wondering what your opinion is on the rise of that, trying to not looking at a gas furnace, but looking at a ductless AC and the energy efficiency with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that before, and I'm not a HVAC person. I'm not at all. But
I guess I was curious if you had any experience of anyone you know.
So we had a really nice
units.
listing this was a few years ago in Old South here in London, and the guy that owned the place had a boiler, so he could not have a central air because he didn't have ducts.
And to clarify, sorry for everybody listening, that ductless AC is put in as a solution when you don't have ducts, when you don't have furnace within your walls, so that you can have a similar experience. It's a unit that's hooked up on your wall, and it has an AC light conditioner on the outside to bring in cold and hot air.
Way to clarify. That's
Thank
right.
you.
I got off topic there.
They might not know.
You're right. So ductless AC, a lot of people haven't seen them. I mean, they can be popular in commercial properties when there's no furnace. So you'll see them. It's more efficient than a window air conditioner, or what we would call a sleeve air conditioner, which doesn't sit in a window. It can sit in the sleeve. They're popular in apartment buildings.
Yeah. Hotels too.
In a hotel.
Yeah.
And a ductless AC is something that the condenser is outside the property and the AC unit is inside the property, and it will blow very cool air to give you a more efficient way to cool your property and have more BTUs than a window air conditioner to cool quicker and be more efficient.
You said that so much more professional than I did.
I'm glad I
and
could.
I have utmost respect
I'm
for
glad
you.
I could. So we are seeing that with people that aren't wanting window air conditioners, but they're not. You're right. They're not as common as central air when you have a furnace, because it's just more properties especially in London, have furnaces instead of boilers. So it's not uncommon, but it's not not the norm.
People are looking to do that to add value to their property, though, and also in getting into rentals.
I think it's. I mean,
in
in the last however many, say the last 25 properties I've shown, 2 of them were boiler, and they both had ductless AC instead of a window air conditioner.
Yeah.
Did they
So
rent
with-
them?
So this was just on showings. That's a good question. I can't remember if they were rentals because I was just showing the property. We weren't writing an offer on them. But the last 2 that I've seen were boilers. Both had ductless AC instead of window air conditioners.
So if you're working with a buyer client and they find the house they love and it has a rental, furnace, and AC that doesn't have an open-ended buyout, what happens? What do you advise your clients to do?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that I don't know if we're all on the same page here. I mean, it's definitely to be an open book for the buyer to make the right decision is disclose it to them and let them make the decision. But it's going to be hard for them to make the decision without having the cost. What is the monthly cost, and will that affect their purchase? And only their lender will be able to tell them that. Like how tight is that going to make them on their monthly payments?
Is there any benefit to purchasing a home with a rented furnace and AC?
I mean, as a buyer's agent, I'm always going to do everything I can to recommend that be bought out by the seller. And a lot of the times we recommend with our listings to also have that bought out because it tends to be an expectation of the buyer. With that being said, everything is based on market and what buyers and sellers are willing to accept.
Every situation is different.
Yes.
You're right.
But as a buyer's agent, I will always advocate for my buyer to get those furnace and ACs purchased, bought out, not rented, and I'm not locked into a contract because it's tried and true that in the long run, it is the better option price-wise, and especially if it's, even if you need to maintenance it for a couple of years and get a new one, and if you're going to be staying there, that's going to pay off a lot more than continuing on a rental, especially if you don't know the details of that rental. That's going to have to be up to them. The risk that they take on with that, I would never advise moving forward on something you don't have the full details on.
You're right. As realtors, we always try to get the best end result for the client. But I have had situations where the buyer's like, no problem. I will inherit that.
Yep.
I'm fine with taking on the payment. The payment's not excessive for me, and the peace of mind knowing that they'll come and deal with the furnace whenever something goes wrong is peace of mind for them. It's not great from a resale perspective, I think, but it's becoming, as you said, it's becoming more common. We're seeing it more and more. So will it affect somebody's buy? I mean, I would say more often than not in a transaction, it comes up from the listing side. If I'm working with a buyer and the listing agent will say, the furnace and AC is rented, just so you know, and I'll say, I saw it in there, and then they'll say, the seller understands they may have to buy that out. Yeah. So I think it's a topic of conversation on both sides.
And from a first-time homebuyer perspective, looking into that, you're just thinking already how many bills you're going to be getting into. You're taking on home ownership. And here's another 2. Bam, your furnace and AC are rented every month. Here's another. It's another thing to digest that you shouldn't have to, in my opinion.
And again, it still brings me back to the fact that as a buyer, first time or not, it affects their monthlies and it can affect their purchase power. When you're talking rented furnace and AC, technically that's a lien on the property. So it's something that you would have to pay monthly, just like property taxes. You can't just not pay it.
Yep, and if you move, then you're going to need to pay that out or have the buyer take over.
Or find another buyer that would inherit it just like you did.
Yeah.
So if you're representing the seller, then it's probably a good idea to have the seller at least have the paperwork available for the buyer so that the buyer understands exactly what the payment is, for how long, and the terms of that payment. Correct?
That's probably the best thing you can do. So they
the information.
So they know what they're getting into. from when you're the seller from a buy perspective to be an absolute open book on whatever rental items or whatever income whatever bills you have on your property that a new buyer would have to inherit. Then I think that's smart. Have it right out on the table for your listing.
Mm-hmm. And that's that extra due diligence and right. So I was going to say too that sometimes with the listing that we don't even realize that we sorry, my team's being distracting here, guys. But sometimes a buyer will want to buy something out, say a water heater. And for example, I had a situation where they wanted to buy out the water heater. Well, the water heater buyout was much less than they were anticipating. So it was a great scenario for them to do. And it was not as hard of a pill to swallow that we thought it was going to be. And by having that information right away and beforehand is the best way to prepare your clients for that. So I think that on both ends, like it can work out. And if it's important to the buyer to have it purchased out, that doesn't always mean the end of the deal. It might.
For sure. I mean, I think you're right. It's not instead of just turning a blind eye to it, get the research done. Get the information from both sides. So there's no question from
you don't agree to anything. Yeah, you don't agree to buy anything out until you know exactly what you're paying and what you're getting into. Yeah.
I think that's smart. So that's probably the biggest challenge when a furnace and AC is just getting the right information and not waiting till the last minute to get it. Yeah. So if you have an interested party, you already have the information there. And no changes every 30 days when you pay the bill down.
And I was at the home show the past weekend. There were 2 furnace and AC companies there, and I asked both of them if they offered financing to purchasers, and they both said yes, in a roundabout way. It was a third-party company, but both companies said that they were open-end contracts. So they could pay them out at any time without excessive penalty. There was definitely an end date so that the person buying the furnace and AC out knew exactly what they were paying out and exactly when it was going to end if they decided to keep on renting it, which is something different from my first experience many years ago. That was unbelievable.
So we're talking about like a rent to own is what you're saying. So they
yes, because there is an end date. Yep, absolutely. And they knew the amount that they were paying with interest. So if say the furnace and AC together was $10,000, they knew if they financed it over several years and finished that contract that they were going to end up paying, for instance, $12,500 or $13,900 or whatever. But they knew what they were paying. Whereas that couple many years ago in St. Thomas, they had no idea. Yeah. And it just kept going on.
No, I mean, the paperwork that they showed was just convoluted. You couldn't really make it out. It was just paragraph after paragraph of just talking in circles, I felt like.
And my last thing I'm going to say before we wrap this up and cut to a break is that even just recently, I was looking into purchasing and buying out my hot water heater, and I was getting some information. And it's not surprising, but it did register that it's funny how even though you called to buy out your contract, they will do everything they can to keep you. So I think we got offered like 3 months off, everything we could to keep our payments and not buy it out. And they'll offer you incentives. And that kind of, it's not surprising, but yeah, just be careful out there, guys, and make the best decision for yourself. We're going to be moving to break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking a lot more about what you should expect with when you're purchasing a home and when you're selling, what you should leave behind, what you can expect to be there, what should be written in your offers, and the stuff that you shouldn't forget.
Great topic.
Awesome. With the Dwyer team, Realty Remarks, part 2 of episode 3. Take it away.
Okay, so what can you expect to leave with your listing once it's sold? And what should a buyer expect is going to be left behind.
So what should you leave with the listing and what buyers would expect? I think that's a great topic.
So should we clarify what is identified in a standard agreement of purchase and sale before we put in the chattels and all that?
So in the standard agreement of purchase and sale, it's the chattels is open. There's really nothing written there. But the unwritten rule is, or if you want to go, the written rule is anything glued or screwed, or people should stay, or people would say if you turn the house upside down, things that don't fall are what's supposed to stay.
So Jerry, define a chattel and define a fixture. So
a fixture is, for example, would be a light fixture. That's considered a fixture.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's right in the name, right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's what when we go to list a property, we always talk about.
So a dining room chandelier, for instance.
Yeah, you know,
I'm just
hanging
picking on
down.
you.
Yeah, light fixtures.
But not a table lamp.
That's right. So something you can plug into the wall and you unplug and you walk away. You can walk away with. That's
something attached. Something
that's
attached.
So when we're working with buyers and I think we're all on the same page here. When we work with buyers, we have our standard what we include with our listing or with our offer contract. So that would be all existing light fixtures, ceiling fans, all closet organizers and shelving, all
bathroom
window
mirrors,
coverings, rods, hardware, bathroom mirrors. Even though a lot of times bathroom mirrors are hung like a picture, it's just on a screw, but a bathroom mirror forms a staple in the bathroom that should stay there.
Yeah, not your decorative mirrors in the hallway.
That's right. We also talk about like backyard stuff, like exterior, like backyard sheds. That should stay. And then are there like...
What about a gazebo?
That's a good question. So is the gazebo... So that we'll dive deep into that. But the gazebo, a lot of times they're screwed down to the deck. So if it's at least from our perspective, I think we're all on the same page again. I think if it's a concern of is that going to stay or not, that comes up in question at time of offer, and if our buyers want, we write it into the deal. We don't assume it's staying. We never want to leave any gray area if we can help it. So we try and eliminate that by writing in as much as we feel is important to the buyer.
What about a hot tub?
Correct. So I have a good story around the hot tub. So hot tubs, you're right. I mean, a hot tub is, even though it's not necessarily screwed down, it's filled with water, it is considered a chattel item. So is that something that you would assume is staying, or would you, if your buyer wants it, would you be writing that in? And I would always say, let's put that into the transaction as an item that the buyer expects to stay and not assumes that it's going to stay.
Especially if it's a nice hot tub.
Well,
In any instance.
Okay, so what about
above ground pool.
What to add? I just into
bookshelves that are attached to the wall? And I'm not talking about built-in bookshelves. I'm talking about wood bookshelves, for instance, that are fixed to the wall, attached
like
to the wall.
Like an IKEA shelf that got screwed into the wall?
Well, a lot of times, so the thing.
Or are you talking about floating shelves?
You guys can't see this out there in the listening world, but we're in a room now where there's a bookshelf right behind us.
A classic looking bookshelf.
You've seen it a million times. You can find them at Canadian Tire, IKEA, Walmart, wherever. And I have young kids, so a lot of times those bookshelves are attached at the top with a small little protective piece. So if a kid starts climbing it doesn't fall over. To me, that's still considered a chattel. It shouldn't stay unless you write it in, but then that's something on the sales side. We're saying your bookshelf is attached, so just remember that if there's damage when you move it, that is the seller's responsibility to fix that. We're not talking a screw hole. We're talking if they rip the paint down or something to get something down.
The same as an arm for a TV on the wall.
It's a great
like
one,
a
for
TV
instance.
mount.
A TV mount.
Yeah.
Most of the time you would assume the buyer would understand if you're selling that the TV doesn't stay. But if the mount is there, we're writing, as buyer's agents, we're writing those in now, aren't we? So we're having that conversation with the seller right from the get-go. Just so you're aware, if you want, you can take your TV, but the mount should, expect that to stay. If you want to take it with you, we have to exclude that right in your listing, and we'll exclude that at time of offer.
What about security systems?
So Hannah and I were just dealing with this.
Back to the rental kind of conversation too.
So security systems now, I think, in the last 10 years have become way more affordable and way more common. We're seeing security right from exterior. Let's talk about Ring doorbells.
I was going to say, so many more options now. Like there's your classic, what is it, AT and
Yeah, like there's AT&T, but Rogers, and Bell, they
Rogers
have
and
home
Bell.
security
But then
systems,
there's
yeah.
also just a Ring doorbell. There's the subscription with Amazon. There's ones you can get that aren't a subscription but are videotaping for 30 minutes. Like
and all the stuff with Apple product, like you can get the like Nest thermostat and the whole home system.
Let's just cover all the tech companies.
Yeah,
They all got one.
There's so many things now that
They just came out with a Samsung robot that's going to follow you around. Just heads up, everyone.
is it like a vacuum or
It's like a little dude with eyes.
little dude.
Yeah,
It feeds your pets dinner.
Is he married? Is he?
Samsung just released it. Okay, back on track.
A little dude.
Samsung sponsor us, please.
So you're right. I mean, in interior cameras now, from listing when we see them, we're saying, okay, are you taking your Ring doorbell with you? You should expect that to stay. Really, I mean, they're transferable. It has a when you.
That's
buy
the most
it,
arguable one.
The
The Ring doorbell, because
It seems to
you
be the most
can
common.
you can detach it from the.
And then we shouldn't probably say Ring doorbell. We should say video doorbell because there's more than just Ring.
Yeah, sorry. When
There's
I
lots of
say
companies
Ring,
that have
I'm
it.
picturing the one
correct.
we're all thinking of, and it does have a fixed piece that you screw into it, but the part of the Ring doorbell is actually removable. It looks like a clicker.
Yeah, but so I have a Ring doorbell at my house,
Yeah.
and there's two forms of it. One is I had an existing doorbell before.
I think I have the
So
knockoff.
it's mine's actually wired in. So I disconnected the doorbell that was there and used that wire as the power source.
That's what I'm saying though. What if it's not wired
That's-
in? What if it's battery powered?
So
and you
you're
can just
still-
remove it.
Yeah, but you're still using the housing to screw in to hold it there, right? Whether it's double-sided tape.
So a buyer's going to expect it to be there, and a seller's probably going to want it taken.
yeah, so
I get
it's,
it.
I feel again.
And so those conversations should be had. If it's important to the buyer, it
That's
should
what
be
I was gonna
written in. If it's
Important to your seller, then
and it just
discuss
needs to
it
be
up front.
gone. You
Yes.
know, like.
So because we do it all the time,
Yeah.
and I mean,
And usually it ends up being little things at the end of the transaction because they're not things that are going to blow up a transaction, right?
I mean, you're right. The last time we experienced the video camera was you and I talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't.
Everything was fine. We
nobody's
were
at
just being
fault.
overly
yeah,
cautious.
it was just it wasn't discussed. We didn't know about it. The seller didn't mention it. Neither did the buyer. So it didn't come up until a week or so before close, where the seller said, "What do I do with my cameras?" And I went, "Oh,
I think there was actually like multiple cameras. We lost track.
yeah." There just wasn't. It never came up in conversation. So it was trying to figure, okay, what's the right thing here? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the buyer didn't really have a decision one way or the other. So it was removed by the seller, and the buyer was okay with it.
It was not even a mention
Yep.
of the buyer. It
Yep.
was all dealt with. We solved a problem before it could be a problem.
Exactly.
Because we
That's the best way to
recognized
put
that
right.
that it could have been, and we made sure.
But then learning
Yeah.
from that, right? Like knowing that these are becoming more popular, so be conscious of that
Mm-hmm.
when we go in for a listing, when we go in to buy, and explain to buyers what is the norm and what we should write into the transaction. Right from cameras to a Nest thermostat. That's another big one. Those digital thermostats that are
Yeah.
programmable. I mean, and you can follow it with an app on your phone. Those are big deals that a lot of times are overlooked, not on purpose. It's just assuming that it's staying, and that's not always the case. So we're trying to alleviate any struggle by writing everything into a transaction, into agreement of purchase and sale before it turns into an issue.
And making sure that your sellers are remembering to transfer the ownership or cancel their subscription and not paying for the new owner security system for 3 years.
Okay, so what's your story about the hot tub?
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
So-
hot tub.
So anyway, back to chattels and fixtures. So writing in a chattel and writing in a fixture. So if again, a fixture is something that is attached to the wall. So for another example, that would be floating shelves are a big deal, and some people want to take them, and some sellers say they're going to leave them, and buyers want them. So we write those. If we're on the buy side, we write that in. And a hot tub and a pool. So even though a pool could be in ground, we write in pool, but we also write in pool equipment. Because
Someone could be
equipment is a
mad
fixture.
and just fill it in with sand.
So we write in pool equipment and hot tub equipment. So the story around that was I had a buyer that purchased a property. It had a hot tub in it. The hot tub was in the listing, all the listing stuff. There were pictures of it. They described it in the listing, and they said it was staying. And I didn't write it into the transaction as a chattel that was staying. And then after the deal had become firm and the buyer had removed all their conditions and the sold sign was on the property, I called the listing agent to ask for a tutorial on the hot tub and what we needed to know. And the agent's response was, Jerry, I'm sorry, the hot tub's not staying. You didn't write it into the transaction, so we're not leaving it. And that's totally valid because it was not written into the deal. The listing really is just a guide. It doesn't mean anything. The agreement of purchase and sale
Even though he had it in the
supersedes
listing.
anything. Yeah. So really at the time, I thought that's bogus. Like that really should be staying. But the buyers were actually thankful that it wasn't staying. They didn't want it anyways. They were gonna get rid of it. So it wasn't as big of a deal as I was making out. But that was just goes to show you about why. I mean, again, I think I can speak for all of us. Why we write in so much that we're want to
so
make
cautious.
sure. Yeah,
sometimes even we receive offers, it's a little
not,
shock because it's empty or
it's
it's covered like
so
crazy.
We want to make sure that the sellers know that those things are supposed to stay.
Yeah.
On the other side of that. So you're right. So now I find I'm writing way more that's necessary than what is necessary, but I want to make sure that the buyer's expectations are met and the seller understands what they're supposed to leave. Mm-hmm. And if I'm on the listing side, I want to make sure the sellers understand what they're supposed to leave, and not try and take something with them when they go that they shouldn't.
And if there's things that are being said or promised or information being disclosed about leaks or repairs or this furnace, like you can confirm all of that too by being protected with an inspection.
That's a good point.
Right.
I mean, home inspections are a big deal. Any good. I mean, I feel like this is a whole other topic. We can
well, you're talking about inspections next week.
Yeah. But you're right, and it's a good way for a buyer to get a little bit of information on what the home has to offer and what they can expect as far as wear and tear and repair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What about stuff outside of a house? For instance, have you ever shown a house in July and they have the Christmas lights up? Do those stay?
Yeah, I mean,
what about window boxes?
I would argue those lights are on a hook or on a nail. You can keep the nail, take the lights down.
Yeah, but a lot of Christmas lights, let's say they're like clipped onto the eaves trough, which I feel is probably the most common. That's why they're up longer.
Or the professionally installed ones.
Yeah. But the professionally installed ones a lot of times are it's a company and they put them up and then they take them down. Someone in my street did that the other day. They were taking the lights down. But the Christmas lights, if I'm working with a buyer and there's
I haven't experienced this, so I'm
Christmas
interested.
lights, I exclude them and say we want those taken down before the closing.
Well, especially if they're way up there, not on a little bungalow.
You're not going to use them. I mean, but you're right. Then
taking them down.
About flower boxes on windowsills, and what about the big, huge pots that are on in between the garage doors on that have seasonal stuff in them, and should those stay? And again, I feel like that comes back to what is the buyer's expectation? Does the seller want to take them? Are they just there decorative? Then we want to make sure they're excluded if the seller wants them, or included if the buyer wants them.
And sometimes there's so many little things, like even garden pots. And how many garden pots you can find out there, and stones, and that's actually a really big question. Recently we had a home, it's beautiful, with a beautiful little farmhouse wheel on the front. And it wasn't
like a wagon wheel?
Yeah, like a wagon wheel. It matched the vibe of the house really well. It was really nice. And but it wasn't a priority for her, so we didn't inquire about it. We just kind of let it happen, and everything got left, and she was thrilled. And if she didn't want it, we said, we'll make sure to get it all out, and we had those conversations before it closed. And so sometimes too, some stuff is getting worked out at the last minute, especially garden-like stuff. But for anything that's important, if that was important for her to have it there and make sure it was there, we would have had that in our offer right away.
So Francis, your story about your experience about plants at the front of the house gone missing. Well, tell us about that.
Well, yeah, you got to talk to your seller. I don't know what happened, but anyway, we sold a house. It was a listing I had, and when the new buyers came on closing to move in, actually, they found all the perennials were taken. My sellers had taken them, dug them up, and taken them with them.
Dug up the flowers.
Yeah, and so that's a no-no. Because I know in the house I had, I really want the ferns. I had transplanted the ferns from every house pretty well. I brought them, but I knew to dig them up, put them in pots, get them out of there before I listed the house, because
Good
I
idea.
guess that if you like those, you know, you planted whatever it is in memorial or whatever.
Correct.
You gotta let your realtor know these plants are gonna be going, we're gonna put them in pots and remove them. Because that was quite a shock for the buyer to come up and there was no
Yeah, and again,
plants in the front.
I don't think it was done maliciously at all. It was just they didn't think it was the seller saying, "Oh, those are my favorite flowers, my favorite." So I took them, not thinking that there was going to be a consequence around it.
But when it's
It's-
offering the curb appeal,
Yeah.
and you know, for all
Oh, yeah.
you know, that could have been something that attracted them,
It
right?
was,
It's a great
Like,
picture.
that's how they
It was-
remembered.
And it
Oh,
did,
I
and it
love the
was a
house,
bit-
those
it was
beautiful
very-
And it showed
flowers,
great
right?
because of it. And I honestly, for everybody out there, I wouldn't notice if somebody took flowers from the front of my house. From the front of my house, I wouldn't notice.
I would.
But I'm not, that's not where. But people that
Don't
are,
take
are
my
gardeners,
flowers.
So for that house, you would know, because that was
Yes.
part of the big curb appeal. So, that, yeah. But
I didn't notice till they were gone. Like you couldn't. I didn't know they were there, but I knew they were gone. I didn't. There wasn't a focal point for me, but it just looked bare.
Well, I
You know?
mean, it's too bad if they wanted to take them, that they didn't replace them with something.
That's right.
Because I don't think most buyers,
No.
if you explain to the buyer, I'm so sorry, we
Yeah.
didn't exclude these, the
you
seller
don't
just says they
normally.
want to take them, would you be okay if we replace the Boston ferns with
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
else?
There's always a
That's what we did,
solution
okay?
somewhere,
That's what we
right?
did.
But that's the interesting thing about our job is we are working with so many different people and so many different situations, and every
so many-
situation is
exactly.
different,
And everybody's
and every
situation-
relationship is different.
Everybody's personality is different.
Exactly.
Well, I have another story because when the
Story by Francis.
yeah, when I lived in Exeter, I bought a house. But again, I think it's so important that people realize when they buy a house that they need to do these walkthroughs before
Oh,
the
yeah.
day
A
of
walkthrough of a
closing.
listing, yeah.
It was not mentioned whether you realtors. I wasn't in the business then. This is about
That's a
20,
good point.
20 years ago. So whether that was invented in real estate life, I don't know. Walkthroughs, but we didn't have any. You just went and bought it. So when I got into the house, the day of the moving van and everything, there was two it was a very old, 100-year-old home, so it had beautiful sconces that were wired in the dining room.
Like light fixtures.
Yes.
Back to the light
Yeah,
fixtures.
yeah,
Yep.
wall
Yep.
So
fixtures.
then when you didn't really notice it at first until you sort of you're moving in. So a day's gone by and all of a sudden I went, oh, the wallpaper is cut and everything. I got 2 holes in the thing and wires cut. Well, I just said, oh, I guess they took them. But I was very ignorant, buying a house and not knowing there was no walkthroughs or anything. We would have seen that. And I heard another story when I was in an open house about when you go into an open house, I don't want it, but it's funny. He didn't lift up the nice throw rug. So when they moved in, they lifted up the throw rug and all the wood was way different.
Rugs.
All different than
The
what
rugs
was
are
coming in.
covering.
So, sorry, it's just funny those stories, but but walkthroughs important, lift up the rugs,
Yeah, I
look
mean,
at the walls.
And
if you
we've
like those
experienced that
sconces.
before too. I mean,
Yeah.
we had a listing in Byron, in London here, and there's a big area rug in the dining room, and when we lifted, this is during a
Okay,
showing
that's what I
though,
heard.
lifted it up, and there was concrete underneath it.
Maybe
Be
that's
From
the
like
story.
there was tile or something, that just
It wasn't
concrete.
the same as the
and it
wood
wasn't the
coming
same.
into the
But and
I have
honestly,
one
that
too
when we
with water damage, and they hit it with a chair over the rug.
And sometimes it's a hide. The seller had been there 25 years, and they didn't think of it till I brought it up to the listing agent and said, "What's going on with the dining room floor?" And then the agent got back to me and said, "Oh my goodness, the seller completely forgot there was something there, and they just covered it with a tile with a rug because it was cheaper than replacing the hardwood." So we noticed it going in, and it didn't stop the buyers from buying it, but at least they knew up front.
Well, yeah, front. That's
Instead of
what's
finding
important.
that out, as you said, with these sconces,
Yeah, they
it's
were gone, and I never, just bought something and stuck them on top of the wall. But now that I know stuff, I wish that I'd had a walkthrough. I wish I would have gone back and got those were part of the house. They were antiques that belonged to that.
And you're right, walkthroughs are very, very important now, and it forms part of the transaction. And we always rate walkthroughs.
So
in.
in conclusion,
Yeah, and just to clarify for everyone listening, because we're all talking about walkthroughs, and that's real
What were
estate
we
talk.
talking about?
A walkthrough is what you do after you have purchased the home before you close to ensure everything is lining up. So in conclusion, I think this has been an awesome talk, guys. I really appreciate everyone that's been bearing with us as we get into our podcast personalities. And if you have any questions for us, reach out. We're going to be releasing some videos with, some podcasts with video soon as well, and posting some clips too. So stay tuned.
This is great. Yeah.
And we'll keep you posted on what's to come.
Again, I think it's going to be important, guys. We really want your opinion on these things too. So if there's topics you want us to discuss, make sure you send them in to us. Give us a shout. Let us know that you have a topic that you'd love us to discuss, and we'll be happy to do that.
Yep, exactly. Because we want to make sure that we are benefiting you.
That's great. Okay. Until next time.
Woo woo! Bye, guys.